The wind howled through the valley like a wounded animal, carrying with it the bite of early winter. Margaret Thornfield pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stood at the window of her cabin, watching the first snowflakes dance against the darkening sky. Another storm was coming. She could feel it in her bones, the way old folks claimed they could predict the weather. Though she was only 28, the years had carved their wisdom into her flesh. The cabin stood alone on the ridge, a solitary sentinel overlooking the vast expanse of Wyoming territory, built by her late father's hands 15 years prior. It had weathered countless storms, both of nature and of the heart. The logs, hewn from the surrounding pines, had darkened with age and smoke from the hearth. Each crack between them had been carefully sealed with mud and moss, creating a fortress against the elements. Yet no amount of chinking could seal out the loneliness that seeped through like winter's chill. Margaret moved away from the window, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The sound seemed louder in the silence, amplified by the absence of any other human presence. She had grown accustomed to these sounds, the creak of floorboards, the settling of logs, the whisper of wind through the chimney. They were her only companions now, save for the few chickens in the coop and old Bessie, the milk cow in the lean-to barn. The interior of the cabin spoke of a life lived in careful economy. A single room served as kitchen, parlor, and bedroom. The iron stove, her most prized possession, squatted in one corner like a benevolent black toad. Near it sat a rocking chair, its runners worn smooth by years of use. First her mother's, then hers. The bed, pushed against the far wall, was covered with a quilt she'd sewn from scraps of her family's clothing, patches of her father's work shirts, her mother's Sunday dress, her brother's outgrown trousers. Each square held a memory, each stitch a prayer for the dead. On the rough-hewn table sat the remains of her supper, cornbread and beans, the same meal she'd eaten for 3 days running. Come spring, she'd plant a bigger garden, maybe trade some eggs in town for seed potatoes. But spring seemed a lifetime away when the snow began to fall in earnest. Town, the very thought of it made her jaw clench. Sweetwater Creek was a day's ride on horseback, half that if she took the wagon, though the trail would soon be impassable with snow. The last time she'd ventured there, 2 months passed. The looks had been almost unbearable. Widow Hensley had crossed the street to avoid her. Mr. Garrett at the general store had served her with tight-lipped disapproval, sliding her change across the counter as if her touch might contaminate the coins. They remembered, of course. How could they forget Thomas Brennan, the banker's son, lying cold in the churchyard these 3 years past? And her, Margaret Thornfield, the woman who'd refused his proposal, who'd chosen her freedom over respectability. They didn't care that Thomas had been a drunkard who'd raised his hand to her more than once during their brief courtship. They only saw a woman who'd spurned a good match, who lived alone like some hermit or witch, defying the natural order of things. Her parents' deaths had sealed her fate. The fever had taken them within days of each other. 2 winters ago. Her brother James had already gone west to California, chasing gold and dreams. The letters had stopped coming a year before the fever struck. She liked to think he'd found his fortune, maybe settled down with a Spanish beauty in San Francisco. The alternative, that he lay in some unmarked grave in the Sierra foothills, was too painful to contemplate. So here she remained, neither widow nor wife, neither young nor old, suspended in a kind of social purgatory. The good women of Sweetwater Creek whispered about her behind their hands. Unnatural, they said. No woman should live alone like that. It ain't Christian. Margaret stoked the fire, adding another log to the flames. The wood popped and hissed, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters she'd secured earlier that day. She should bring in more wood before the storm hit in earnest, should check on the animals one last time. But a bone-deep weariness held her in place. This was her life now, the daily struggle against the elements, the careful rationing of supplies, the endless silence broken only by wind and weather. She'd grown used to talking to herself, to the chickens, to Bessie. Sometimes she'd catch herself in long conversations with her mother's ghost, asking advice about preserving vegetables or mending tears in her clothing. "You're turning strange. Margaret May," she said aloud, using her mother's pet name for her. The sound of her own voice startled her, seemed to mock the empty room. She thought of the other women in town, gathering for quilting bees and church socials, their children playing at their feet, their husbands coming home each evening smelling of honest work. Did they ever lie awake at night, wondering if they'd chosen correctly? Did they ever feel the walls closing in, the weight of expectations crushing their spirits? But those were dangerous thoughts. She'd made her choice, and she'd live with it. Better to be alone and free than shackled to a man who saw her as property. Better to face the wilderness on her own terms than submit to the narrow confines of town life. The storm arrived with a vengeance as night fell. Snow slanted sideways past the windows, driven by winds that seemed determined to tear the cabin from its foundations. Margaret banked the fire carefully, changed into her nightgown, and slipped beneath the heavy quilts. The familiar sounds of the storm wrapped around her, the moan of wind, the creak of timbers, the occasional thump of something striking the walls. In the darkness, she allowed herself one moment of raw honesty. The loneliness sat on her chest like a living thing, making it hard to breathe. She was 28 years old, and she'd been truly held by another human being in 3 years. The last embrace had been her mother's, fever-weak arms trying to comfort even as life slipped away. "Stop it," she whispered fiercely. "You're stronger than this." And she was. She'd survived worse storms, both inside and out. Tomorrow she'd wake, tend the animals, melt snow for water, go about the business of living. The day after would be the same, and the day after that. This was the life she'd chosen, and she'd make the best of it. But as sleep finally claimed her, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming with this storm, something that would shatter the careful walls she'd built around her heart. The wind seemed to carry whispers of change, of danger, of possibilities she dared not name. In her dreams, she heard a sound that didn't belong to the storm, the cry of an infant, thin and desperate, calling out through the howling night. The pounding came just after midnight, violent enough to shake snow from the roof. Margaret jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a moment, she thought it was the storm, a tree branch torn loose, perhaps, or a shutter she'd failed to secure properly. But the sound came again, deliberate and desperate, 3 heavy blows against her door. She lay frozen beneath the quilts, every muscle tense. No one came calling in weather like this, no one with good intentions. Anyway, her father's old Springfield rifle hung above the mantel, loaded and ready. She'd cleaned it just last week, the ritual of maintenance giving her hands something useful to do during the long evenings. The pounding came again, weaker this time, then cutting through the howl of the wind. She heard something that made her blood run cold, the thin, mewling cry of an infant. Margaret threw off the covers and padded to the window, trying to peer through the frost-covered glass. The snow fell in sheets, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. She could make out a dark shape near her door, large and hunched against the storm. Her hands shook as she lit the lantern, pulled on her heaviest shawl over her nightgown. The rifle felt reassuring in her grip as she approached the door. "Who's there?" she called, trying to keep her voice steady. No answer came, just that terrible infant cry, weaker now, almost lost in the wind. Against every instinct screaming at her to bar the door and wait for daylight, Margaret lifted the heavy wooden beam that secured it. She cracked the door open an inch, then 2, the wind immediately trying to tear it from her grasp. What she saw made her stumble backward, nearly dropping the rifle. A man knelt in the snow on her doorstep. But what a man! He was enormous, his broad shoulders blocking out the swirling darkness behind him. Long black hair, crusted with ice, hung past his shoulders. His face, what she could see of it, bore the unmistakable features of an Apache warrior. Blood ran from a gash above his eye, mixing with the melting snow on his bronze skin. But it was what he cradled against his chest that stopped her breath. Wrapped in what looked like a cavalry blanket was a baby, no more than a few weeks old, its face pinched and blue with cold. The Apache raised his head, and their eyes met. His were black as midnight, filled with a desperation that transcended language or race. His lips, cracked and bleeding, formed words in accented English. "Please, baby, dying. Can we stay one night?" Margaret's grip tightened on the rifle. Every story she'd ever heard about Indians flooded her mind. Tales of scalping, torture, settlements burned to ash. But those stories warred with what her eyes saw: a man, wounded and frozen, trying to shelter an infant with his own body against the killing cold. "Just one night," he said again, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Then we go." The baby's cry had stopped. That silence terrified her more than any sound. "Get inside," she heard herself say, stepping back from the door. The Apache struggled to rise, his massive frame swaying like a tree in the wind. He was barefoot, she realized with shock, his feet leaving bloody prints in the snow. How far had he walked like this? How was he even alive? He stumbled through the doorway, bringing a swirl of snow and cold air with him. Margaret slammed the door shut, dropped the bar back into place, then turned to face her unexpected guests. In the lantern light, she could see him more clearly. He wore only leather leggings and a torn shirt that might once have been white. No coat, no blanket, save the one wrapped around the child. His arms and chest bore numerous scars, some old, some fresh. The wound above his eye was deep, probably from a fall or a blow. He sank to his knees near the door, still cradling the baby, his whole body shaking with cold or exhaustion or both. "Please," he said again, and she realized it might be one of the few English words he knew. Margaret set the rifle aside but kept it within reach. She grabbed blankets from her bed, threw one around the man's shoulders. "Give me the baby," she said, holding out her arms. He hesitated, his arms tightening protectively around the small bundle. "I won't hurt it," Margaret said softly, the way she'd speak to a spooked horse. "But it needs warmth, quickly." Something in her tone must have reached him. Slowly, reluctantly, he extended the bundle toward her. Their hands brushed as she took the child, and she was shocked by how cold his skin felt, like touching stone left out in winter. Margaret unwrapped the cavalry blanket with trembling fingers. The baby was tiny, perhaps 3 weeks old, with a shock of black hair and features that spoke of mixed heritage. Its skin had a grayish tinge that sent fear shooting through her. She pressed her ear to the small chest and nearly sobbed with relief at the faint heartbeat. "Still alive," she said, looking at the Apache. "But barely." She didn't wait for a response. Doubt he'd understand anyway. Moving quickly now, driven by an urgency that overrode all other concerns. She brought the baby to the stove. The fire had died to embers, but the iron still radiated warmth. She grabbed more blankets, created a nest on the floor near the heat, then began stripping the wet clothes from the infant's body. A girl. The baby was a girl, perfect and tiny and fighting for each breath. Margaret had helped deliver babies in town before things went sour, had learned from her mother how to coax life back into those born too still, too quiet. She rubbed the baby's limbs gently, warming the blood, encouraging circulation. She heated water on the stove, dipped a cloth in it, and dripped warm liquid between the blue-tinged lips. Behind her, she heard the Apache collapse fully to the floor, his strength finally failing. "Don't you die on me too," she muttered, still working over the baby. "I can't dig graves in frozen ground." The baby's color began to improve, the grayish cast giving way to a healthier pink. Her breathing grew stronger, more regular, when Margaret wrapped her in warm, dry blankets and held her close. The infant's eyes fluttered open, dark eyes, like her father's. assuming the Apache was her father. A sound behind her made Margaret turn. The Apache had dragged himself closer to the stove, leaving a trail of melted snow and blood across her floor. He was watching her with the baby, his face unreadable but his eyes intense. "She's going to be all right," Margaret said, knowing he probably couldn't understand but needing to say it anyway. "But you won't be if we don't get you warm too." She settled the baby in the nest of blankets, making sure she was secure and warm, then turned her attention to the man. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, though the hard lines of his face suggested a difficult life. The wound above his eye needed cleaning, and she suspected there were other injuries hidden beneath his clothes. "Can you understand me?" she asked slowly. He nodded slightly. "Some trading posts, army forts." His voice was deep, hoarse with cold and exhaustion. "Good. You need to get out of those wet clothes. You'll die of cold otherwise." His jaw tightened, pride warring with necessity. Margaret sighed, grabbed more blankets, and created a screen of sorts. "I'll turn my back, but those clothes come off, or you'll be no good to that baby come morning." She busied herself heating more water, determinedly keeping her back turned as she heard the rustle of wet leather and cloth being removed. When she finally turned around, he had wrapped himself in the blankets, his wet clothes in a pile by the door. "Now," she said, all business to hide her nervousness. "Let's see about that head wound." She gathered her medical supplies, such as they were: clean cloth, the bottle of whiskey she kept for emergencies, a needle and thread her mother had boiled in lye. The Apache sat still as stone while she cleaned the gash, though she saw his hands clench when she poured the whiskey over it. "This will hurt," she warned before beginning to stitch. He nodded, his eyes moving between her face and the baby sleeping by the stove. As she worked, questions burned in her mind. Who was he? Where had the baby's mother gone? Why was he traveling in such weather, so poorly equipped? But she kept silent, concentrating on making small, neat stitches that would hold the wound closed. When she finished, she sat back on her heels, studying her handiwork. It would scar, but it would heal clean if infection didn't set in. "There are other wounds," she said, gesturing to the blood seeping through the blanket near his ribs. He shook his head. "Tomorrow. Baby first." As if summoned by his words. The infant began to cry, not the weak, mewling sound from before, but a proper baby's wail, demanding and alive. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes at the sound. "She's hungry," she said, then realized the impossibility of the situation. "The mother, dead," he said simply, his face a mask of controlled grief. 2 days. Soldiers came. She ran, fell." He made a gesture indicating a fall from height. Margaret's throat tightened. "And you've been traveling since then with a newborn?" He nodded. "Your smoke. Saw yesterday. Only hope." The full weight of it hit her then. This man had walked through a blizzard, barefoot and wounded, carrying a baby, on the desperate chance that the smoke from her chimney meant salvation. How many others would have turned them away? Shot first and asked questions later. "I have goat's milk," she said finally. "From last summer, dried. It's not ideal, but it'll keep her alive until..." Until what? She couldn't think that far ahead. She prepared the milk, warming it carefully, testing the temperature on her wrist the way her mother had taught her. The Apache watched every movement, memorizing the process. When she picked up the baby and began to feed her using a clean cloth dipped in the milk, he moved closer, his dark eyes never leaving the infant's face. The baby drank greedily, her tiny fists waving in the air. Margaret found herself smiling despite everything. "She's a fighter, this one." "Like mother," the Apache said softly. They sat in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire, the baby's satisfied sucking, and the storm still raging outside. Margaret knew she should be terrified. She'd invited danger into her home, sheltered enemies of the government, if anyone in town found out. But watching the tender way the Apache's eyes followed the baby's movements, the careful way he'd protected her even at the cost of his own life, Margaret felt only a strange sense of rightness. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight she'd chosen mercy over fear.
"Margaret," she said suddenly. "My name is Margaret."
He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his dark eyes. "Joseph," he said finally. "Mission name. Apache name." He shrugged. "Too hard for white tongues."
"Joseph,"
she repeated. It didn't suit him at all, this Christian name pasted over his true identity. But she understood the necessity of it. And the baby. "No name yet. Mother died before—" He trailed off. Margaret looked down at the infant, now drowsing contentedly in her arms. "Well, we can't keep calling her the baby. How about Hope, because that's what brought you to my door, Hope?" Joseph considered this, then nodded slowly. "Hope," he repeated, the English word careful on his tongue. "Yes." As the night wore on and the storm continued its assault on the cabin, Margaret found herself in the strangest situation of her life, sitting by the fire with an Apache warrior, passing a half-breed infant between them, while the rest of the world slept unknowing. Tomorrow would bring questions, dangers, impossibilities. But tonight, in the circle of warmth and light carved out of the howling darkness, 3 souls had found each other. And that, Margaret thought as she settled the baby to sleep, was its own kind of miracle. Dawn came slowly, the storm having blown itself out sometime in the early hours. Pale light filtered through the frost-covered windows, revealing a world transformed by snow. Margaret woke stiff from dozing in the rocking chair, Hope cradled in her arms. The baby stirred, making small sucking motions with her rosebud mouth. Joseph sat exactly where she'd left him, back against the wall near the stove, blankets wrapped around him like a chief's robe. His eyes were closed, but Margaret knew he wasn't sleeping. She'd learned to recognize the difference in her father, the way truly sleeping men relaxed completely, while those merely resting remained coiled like springs. "The storm's past," she said softly. His eyes opened immediately, dark and alert. "Yes." Margaret rose carefully, her body protesting the night spent in the chair. She placed Hope in the nest of blankets near the warmth and busied herself stoking the fire, adding wood until flames danced cheerfully behind the grate. The familiar morning ritual felt strange with eyes upon her. "I'll need to see to the animals," she said, "and bring in more wood." Joseph shifted, wincing. "I help." "You'll do no such thing." She turned to face him, hands on her hips. "Not until I've looked at those other wounds, and not barefoot in 2 feet of snow." His jaw tightened. That pride again. Margaret softened her tone. "There's no shame in healing. You're no good to Hope dead." The mention of the baby seemed to reach him. He nodded reluctantly. Margaret heated water, gathered fresh bandages. "Behind the blanket screen," she instructed. "I need to see what we're dealing with." What she found made her bite her lip to keep from gasping. His left side bore a long, angry gash, partially scabbed but still seeping. Bruises mottled his ribs. Boot prints. She realized with sick certainty. Someone had kicked him while he was down. His back showed older scars, some from wounds, others the distinctive marks of a whip. "Soldiers?" she asked quietly, cleaning the side wound with gentle efficiency. "Sometimes soldiers, sometimes others." His voice betrayed no emotion. "Apache life." She worked in silence, cleaning and binding what she could. His skin was fever-warm now, fighting infection. She'd need to make a poultice, maybe willow bark tea if she had any left from autumn gathering. "There." She sat back. "That'll hold for now. But you need rest, proper food, and time to heal." "No time. Move today." "Don't be foolish." Margaret began packing away her supplies. "You can barely stand, and Hope needs regular feeding. You wouldn't make it a mile." His expression darkened. Bring trouble? You. I've had trouble before. She met his gaze steadily. I'm still here. Something passed between them in that look, an understanding, perhaps, or recognition. Two people who'd learned to survive outside society's protection. Hope's cry broke the moment. Margaret prepared more goat's milk, aware of Joseph watching her every move. When she picked up the baby, she hesitated, then held her out to him. Would you like to feed her? His hands, so large they could probably snap her neck without effort, trembled slightly as he took the infant. Margaret showed him how to support her head, how to let her suck the milk from the cloth at her own pace. Slowly, she cautioned, her stomach still very small. The sight of the massive warrior cradling the tiny baby with infinite gentleness did strange things to Margaret's chest. She turned away, busying herself with breakfast preparation to hide her confusion. You have children? Joseph asked. No. The word came out sharper than intended. Never married. Husband dead. No husband, ever. She kept her back to him, slicing bacon with unnecessary vigor. I choose to live alone. Silence stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, Joseph said, Strong choice, like Apache woman, choose her path. Margaret turned, surprised. Apache women can choose. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. White men think Apache women slaves. Not true. Woman owns teepee, children, can divorce bad husband, send him back to his mother. The smile faded. Hope's mother. She chose me, half-blood, no clan. Others said foolish. She said heart knows truth. What happened to her? Soldiers came to winter camp. Said we steal cattle. Not true, we trade fair. But they want Apache land. So Apache must go. Fight started. His voice roughened. She ran with other women. Rock gave way. Fell into canyon. I climbed down, but... He stopped, jaw working. Margaret abandoned the bacon, moved to sit near him. I'm sorry. Found her alive? Baby coming? Too much blood. She make me promise. Save baby. Find good people. He looked directly at Margaret. Your smoke only one I see. 2 days walking, feet freeze, head hit by rock. Think maybe die, but promise is promise. And you always keep your promises. Apache word is life. Break word. Lose honor. Better dead. They sat quietly while Hope finished feeding, milk drunk and content. Margaret took her, settling her against her shoulder to pat her back. The domestic gesture felt natural, as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. Sing, Joseph said suddenly. Last night, you sing like mission bells, but warmer. Margaret flushed. She hadn't realized he'd been conscious enough to hear, just an old lullaby. My mother sang it to me. Sing again for Hope. How could she refuse? Margaret settled back in the rocking chair. Hope cradled in her arms and began to sing softly. Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird. And if that mockingbird won't sing, Papa's gonna buy you a diamond ring. Her voice, unpracticed but true, filled the small cabin. Joseph closed his eyes, tension easing from his shoulders. Hope's breathing deepened into sleep. And if that horse and cart fall down, you'll still be the sweetest little baby in town. As the last note faded, Margaret found Joseph watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Your mother? He asked. Dead, 2 years now. Fever took her and my father both. No clan, no family. A brother, maybe, in California. Haven't heard from him in 3 years. Joseph nodded slowly. You understand then, being last one, carrying memories alone. Margaret's throat tightened. Yes, she understood. The weight of being the sole keeper of family stories, recipes, traditions. The fear that when you died, a whole world would die with you. We're not alone now, she said quietly. For however long you stay, we're not alone. Joseph looked at her for a long moment, then at Hope sleeping peacefully. "One day," he said, "maybe two, then go." Margaret knew better than to argue. Instead, she rose to finally see to her morning chores. "I have an old pair of my father's boots. They might fit. And there's a coat that's too big for me." His pride flared again. "No charity." "Not charity, practicality. You're no good to Hope with frozen feet." She paused at the door. "Besides, you can repay me. That woodpile won't split itself. Once you're healed." Before he could protest further, she wrapped herself in her heaviest shawl and stepped out into the brilliant morning. The world lay pristine under its blanket of snow, unmarked save for the wind's sculptings. Margaret waded through the drifts to the barn, checking on Bessie and the chickens, breaking ice from water buckets, distributing feed. The familiar tasks grounded her, gave her time to think. What was she doing, harboring an Apache warrior and a baby, knowing full well the consequences if discovered? The army would arrest her. The town would finally have the excuse they'd wanted to drive her out completely. She could lose everything: her home, her freedom, maybe her life. But the image of Joseph cradling Hope, the memory of his desperate trek through the storm, the promise made to a dying woman. How could she turn them out? How could she be another closed door in a world full of them? By the time she returned to the cabin, arms full of wood, she'd made her decision. Whatever came, she'd face it. She'd been living like a ghost anyway, going through motions, existing but not truly alive. Last night, for the first time in 2 years, she'd felt purpose beyond mere survival. Joseph had managed to stand, was looking out the window at the snow-covered valley. He'd found her father's boots, she noticed, though he'd had to cut the sides to accommodate his wider feet. "Beautiful," he said simply. "Yes," she stacked the wood by the stove. "Dangerous too. That beauty hides how quickly it can kill." "All beauty dangerous. Make men stupid, make them forget careful." Margaret laughed, surprising herself. "Spoken like a man who's known beautiful women." "One." His voice softened. "Made me forget all careful. Forget half-blood means no place. Forget world wants us apart. But you don't regret it." Joseph turned from the window, his dark eyes finding hope in her makeshift cradle. "Regret, no. Pain worth joy. Always." Margaret busied herself with breakfast, frying bacon and biscuits, brewing strong coffee. Joseph ate slowly, carefully, as if relearning the act. She wondered how long since he'd had a proper meal. As they ate, a comfortable silence settled between them. Not the heavy silence of strangers, but something easier. The cabin felt different with their presence, warmer somehow, more alive. Even the shadows seemed less oppressive. Hope woke demanding food. This time Joseph prepared the milk himself, his movements careful but confident. Margaret watched, offering small corrections, pleased at how quickly he learned. "You'll make a good father," she said without thinking, then blushed at the presumption. "Must learn, no choice. Hope needs father, mother too." He paused in feeding the baby. "Maybe you—" "I'm happy to help while you're here," Margaret interrupted quickly. "But you'll need to find a proper family for her. A married couple. People who can give her a real home." Joseph's expression closed off. "Yes, of course." The rest of the day passed quietly. Joseph insisted on bringing in more wood despite Margaret's protests, though she could see each movement cost him. She busied herself with indoor tasks, mending, cooking, tending Hope. The baby seemed stronger already, her cries more vigorous, her color healthy. As evening approached, Margaret found herself dreading nightfall, not from fear, but from the knowledge that each passing hour brought their departure closer. Already the cabin would feel emptier when they left. She was teaching Joseph to change Hope's makeshift diaper when he suddenly stiffened, head tilting toward the door. "What is it?" Margaret whispered. "Horses. Coming." Margaret's blood chilled. She couldn't hear anything yet, but she didn't doubt his keener senses. How many? 2, maybe 3. Her mind raced. The storm would have kept most people home, but someone might have seen the smoke, wondered if she'd survived. Or worse, someone might have tracked Joseph here. "Behind the bed," she hissed. "Take hope. Stay quiet." Joseph didn't argue. He scooped up the baby and melted into the shadows with a grace that belied his injuries. Margaret quickly hid any sign of their presence. The extra blankets, Joseph's wet clothes, the baby's things. She grabbed her rifle, checked it was loaded, then waited. The horses were audible now, struggling through the snow. Margaret peered through the window and nearly groaned aloud. Sheriff Bowman and 2 deputies. The worst possible visitors save for soldiers themselves. A heavy knock rattled her door. "Miss Thornfield, you in there?" Margaret took a breath, composed herself, and opened the door a crack. "Sheriff, bit late for social calls, isn't it?" Bowman's weathered face was suspicious beneath his hat brim. "Storm was fierce. Town council wanted us to check on folks living alone, make sure everyone survived." "As you can see, I'm fine." She didn't open the door wider. "Mind if we come in? Boys could use some warming." "I mind very much. It's not proper. 3 men and an unmarried woman." One of the deputies snickered. Bowman silenced him with a look. "Now, Miss Thornfield, no need to be unfriendly. We're just being neighborly." "Since when has anyone in town been neighborly to me?" "Sheriff," his eyes narrowed. "Maybe if you acted more like a proper woman, people would treat you as such." Margaret's grip on the rifle tightened. "I'll thank you to state your business and leave." "Well now, funny thing. Telegram came through before the storm. Army's looking for a renegade Apache. Killed some soldiers. They say, stole a baby from a settlement. Big man. Traveling on foot. You haven't seen anyone like that." Margaret forced herself to meet his eyes steadily. "In this storm, anyone fool enough to be out in that is dead by now." "Maybe, maybe not. Apache are tough as leather." Bowman leaned closer. "Be a shame if someone was hiding him. That's hanging offense. You know, aiding enemies of the United States." "I'm well aware of the law. Sheriff, now, if you're satisfied I'm alive, I'd appreciate you leaving. I have chores to finish before dark." Bowman studied her for a long moment, behind the cabin wall. Margaret heard the faintest sound, Hope beginning to fuss. Her heart stopped. "What was that?" the deputy asked. "What was what?" Margaret forced confusion into her voice. "Sounded like cat," she said quickly. "Barn cat had kittens last month. They get vocal when they're hungry." Bowman clearly didn't believe her, but without cause to force entry, he was stuck. "You sure you're alone? Miss Thornfield?" "As I have been for 2 years. Sheriff, by choice, I might add." "Unnatural choice," he muttered, then louder. "You see or hear anything unusual, you ride to town immediately. Understood?" "Of course." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good evening, then. Boys, mount up." Margaret watched through the window until they disappeared into the gathering dusk, then sagged against the door. Too close, far too close. Joseph emerged from behind the bed, Hope whimpering in his arms. "I go now. Bring too much danger." "Don't be foolish. You leave now. They'll find your tracks come morning. You'd lead them right to you. Better than bring harm to you." Margaret took Hope from him, soothing her automatically. "They're suspicious, but they have no proof. We'll be more careful. And Joseph," she looked up at him, "I made my choice when I opened that door last night. I'm not changing it now." He studied her face, then nodded slowly. "You strange woman, Margaret Thornfield." "So I've been told." She managed a weak smile. "Now, let's get this little one fed before she brings the roof down." As she prepared Hope's milk, Margaret's hands trembled slightly. The visit had shaken her more than she cared to admit, but watching Joseph gently take the baby, Seeing the trust in his eyes, she knew she'd spoken true. Whatever came next, she wouldn't abandon them. Not to the storm, not to the sheriff, not to the cruel world that wanted them dead simply for existing. They'd found sanctuary in her cabin, and by God, she'd defend that sanctuary with everything she had. The fire crackled peacefully. Hope fed contentedly. And for this moment at least, they were safe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, in this small circle of warmth carved from the vast cold darkness, 3 broken people had formed something that might, if they were very careful and very lucky, grow into a family. 3 days had passed since the sheriff's visit, and Margaret knew she couldn't postpone the inevitable any longer. Her supplies were running dangerously low. The goat's milk powder wouldn't last another day, and Hope needed proper cloth for diapers. The baby was thriving, her cries strong and demanding. But that health depended on consistent care Margaret couldn't provide with empty cupboards. "I have to go to town," she announced over breakfast, trying to sound matter-of-fact. Joseph's hand stilled halfway to his mouth. "Not safe." "Neither is letting Hope go hungry." She busied herself clearing dishes. "I'll be careful. Quick trip to Garrett's store. Maybe stop by the seamstress for cloth scraps. Back before nightfall." "They watch you now. Sheriff's eyes everywhere." "They've watched me for years." Margaret kept her voice light despite the knot in her stomach. "I'm used to it." Joseph set down his fork. "I go with you." "Absolutely not. An Apache in Sweetwater Creek, they'd shoot you on sight." "Then I go alone. You stay with Hope." Margaret whirled to face him. "And have them wonder why I didn't come myself, that would confirm their suspicions faster than anything?" She softened her tone. "Joseph, I've navigated that town's hostility for 3 years. I can handle 1 more day." He rose, pacing to the window with the restless energy of a caged wolf. His injuries had healed remarkably fast, though Margaret suspected he hid lingering pain behind his stoic facade. "Don't like too much danger." "Life is danger." She moved to stand beside him, looking out at the snow-covered trail. "But some things can't be avoided. Hope needs supplies. We need food. I have eggs to trade and a little money saved. It has to be done." Joseph turned to study her face. "You sure?" "Yes." "Then I make a list. What Hope needs, exact." Together they catalogued necessities, while Hope slept in her makeshift cradle, really just a wooden crate lined with soft blankets. Joseph's careful attention to detail surprised Margaret. He remembered exactly how much milk powder she used, how often Hope needed changing, which cloths worked best for feeding. "You're a quick learner," she said, wrapping her heaviest shawl around her shoulders. "Must learn, for her." He glanced at the sleeping baby. "She all I have left of?" "I know." Margaret impulsively touched his arm. "I'll be back before dark. Keep the fire going, but not too high. Smoke draws attention. If anyone comes, I know how to hide." His hand covered hers briefly. "You be careful. Margaret Thornfield, I need you come back." The unexpected vulnerability in his voice made her chest tight. "I will." The journey to town took longer than usual, her old mare picking carefully through the snowdrifts. Margaret had hitched her to the small wagon, knowing she'd need to haul supplies. The familiar rhythm of travel gave her too much time to think. What was she doing? In 3 days, her life had transformed completely. She'd gone from resigned solitude to, playing mother to an orphaned baby. Harboring a man whose very existence here broke federal law. The rational part of her mind screamed warnings, but her heart had already chosen its path. Sweetwater Creek appeared around the bend, smoke rising from chimneys into the cold blue sky. The town looked deceptively peaceful, like a painting of frontier tranquility. Margaret knew better. Behind those frost-etched windows, tongues were already wagging. She'd barely tied her mare to the hitching post when Mrs. Abigail Hensley emerged from the millinery shop like a crow sensing carrion. "Why, Margaret Thornfield?" We thought you might have frozen to death in that storm.
Sorry to disappoint. Mrs.
Hensley. Margaret kept her voice pleasant.
Just needed supplies. All alone in that cabin. Must have been frightening.
The older woman's eyes glittered with malicious curiosity.
Sheriff Bowman said he checked on you.
He did. Very kind of him. Said he heard something strange, like a baby crying. Margaret forced a laugh.
Barn cats. They make the oddest sound sometimes.
Mrs. Hensley clearly didn't believe her. Well, you take care now. Terrible things happening lately. That Apache killer still on the loose. Margaret escaped into Garrett's general store before the interrogation could continue. The familiar scents of pickle brine, coffee, and leather should have been comforting, but Garrett's cold stare ruined any sense of welcome. Miss Thornfield. He didn't smile. What can I do for you? Margaret placed her carefully written list on the counter.
These items, please. I have eggs to trade and cash for the rest.
Garrett scanned the list, his bushy eyebrows rising. Goat's milk powder, that's unusual. I'm raising an orphaned calf, she lied smoothly. Cow's milk doesn't agree with it.
5 pounds seems excessive for one calf.
I'd rather not make another trip soon. The weather's been unpredictable. He grunted but began gathering items. Margaret forced herself to browse casually, adding a few things to avoid suspicion thread. Needles, a small bag of peppermint sticks she couldn't really afford. That's quite a bit of flour and cornmeal, Garrett observed as he tallied her purchases. I'm stocking up before the trails become impassable. Planning to feed an army. Margaret met his suspicious gaze steadily.
Just myself, Mr. Garrett, same as always.
The bell above the door chimed. Sheriff Bowman entered, his timing far too convenient to be coincidental.
Miss Thornfield, surprised to see you in town so soon?
Supply run. Sheriff, that storm depleted my stores. Bowman's eyes tracked over her purchases, lingering on the milk powder.
Lot of supplies for one woman. I believe my shopping habits are my own business.
Everything's my business when there's a dangerous criminal loose. He stepped closer. You know, some folks think you might be sympathetic to Indians. What with your unconventional views on things. Margaret's spine stiffened.
My views on independence have nothing to do with harboring criminals.
Don't they, woman who rejects society's protection might seek companionship elsewhere? Heat flooded her face.
How dare you?
Just thinking out loud. Bowman's smile was predatory. You know, if someone was hiding that Apache, it'd go easier on them if they cooperated. Turn him in voluntary-like. I have nothing to turn in but eggs. Sheriff, for now. He touched his hat brim. You have a safe trip home, Miss Thornfield. Dangerous roads for a woman alone. The threat hung in the air after he left. Garrett finished totaling her purchases in silence, his disapproval palpable. Margaret paid, helped load her wagon, and headed for the seamstress shop. Mrs. Chen ran the small establishment, one of the few Chinese allowed to operate in town. Her position as an outsider created an unspoken bond with Margaret, though they rarely spoke beyond business. Miss Thornfield. Mrs. Chen's English was carefully precise. How may I help? Cloth scraps, please, for quilting.
Mrs.
Chen studied her for a moment, then gathered a generous bundle of soft cottons and flannels. These work well for quilting. Very soft, good for delicate work. Margaret felt her eyes burn with unexpected gratitude. Thank you. Women must help women.
Mrs.
Chen said quietly,
especially when world is cold.
Margaret paid and left quickly, afraid her emotions would betray her. As she loaded the wagon, she became aware of eyes watching from windows and doorways. The town's attention felt like a physical weight. At the livery stable, she overheard 2 men talking.
Swear I saw tracks leading toward the Thornfield place.
Always was peculiar, living alone like that. And the sheriff's organizing a search party if that Apache shows his face. Margaret clicked to her mare, urging her into a trot despite the snowy roads. She needed to get home, needed to warn Joseph. The town's suspicion was crystallizing into something more dangerous. The journey home felt endless. Every shadow could hide watching eyes. Every wind snap of branches might be pursuing hooves. By the time her cabin came into view, Margaret's nerves were strung tight as fence wire. Joseph met her at the door, rifle in hand, relaxing only when he recognized her. Trouble. He helped her down from the wagon. Maybe, probably. She accepted hope from his arms, the baby's warm weight instantly calming. They're suspicious, the sheriff especially, and people are talking about organizing search parties. Joseph's jaw tightened as he unloaded supplies. We leave tonight. No. Margaret followed him inside. That's what they expect. If you disappear now, they'll know I helped you. They'll track you in the snow. Better than bringing harm. Joseph. She turned to face him. Listen, they suspect, but they don't know. If you leave now, in your condition, with hope, you won't make it 20 miles before they catch you. But if we're smart, if we wait for the right moment. What you suggest? Margaret settled into the rocking chair, adjusting hope for feeding. We maintain normalcy. You stay hidden. I go about my usual routine. Let their suspicion die down. And if not die down, then we make a plan, a real plan, not a desperate flight into winter. She looked up at him. Trust me, please. Joseph stood silent for a long moment, watching her feed hope with practiced ease. The baby gurgled contentedly, tiny fist wrapped around Margaret's finger. Why? He asked finally. Why risk everything for us? Margaret considered her answer. 3 years ago, I chose isolation to protect myself, built walls so high and thick nothing could get through. But walls that keep pain out also keep life out. She looked down at Hope's peaceful face. When you knocked on my door, those walls cracked. Maybe I'm tired of being safe and dead inside. Not dead. Joseph moved closer. Sleeping, like bear in winter, waiting for spring. Is that what this is, spring? Maybe. His fingers brushed Hope's dark hair. Maybe we all sleeping until right moment. They worked together to put away supplies, a comfortable rhythm developing between them. Joseph had reorganized her limited storage, making room for Hope's things. Small changes that somehow made the cabin feel more like a home than it had in years. As Margaret prepared dinner, she told him about town, about Mrs. Chen's kindness and Mrs. Hensley's spite, about the sheriff's threats and the gathering storm of suspicion. This Mrs. Chen, Joseph said thoughtfully. She knows. I think she suspects, but she won't say anything. She understands what it's like to be unwelcome. Good ally, worth remembering. Margaret ladled stew into bowls. You're thinking like a warrior again. Always warrior, but warrior with baby must think different. He accepted his bowl with a nod of thanks. Must be smart, not just strong. They ate quietly while Hope slept. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, despite the danger pressing from outside. Margaret felt an odd sense of peace. This domestic scene, sharing a meal, caring for a child, simple companionship, was everything she'd thought she'd given up. Tell me about her, she said suddenly. Hope's mother. Joseph's expression softened. She called Mary at mission school. Apache name was Singing River, beautiful like morning light on water. He paused. Stubborn too. When she chose me, her family angry. Half-blood means no clan protection, but she say heart speaks louder than blood. She sounds brave. Braver than warriors. She know choosing me meant choosing hard path. No place in Apache world, no place in white world. But she say we make own place. His voice roughened. Almost did. Had small farm, Traded fair with everyone. Then soldiers came.
I'm sorry. She not want pity. Want Hope to know she was loved. Want her to know mother died trying save her. He met Margaret's eyes. That's why must find good people for Hope. People who teach her she belongs somewhere. Margaret's throat tightened. She belongs with you. Apache father, Mexican mother, born running from soldiers. What life is that? A life with someone who loves her. That's more than many get. Joseph shook his head. Love not enough. Need safety, need acceptance, need future. Margaret wanted to argue, but couldn't. He was right. Love alone couldn't protect Hope from a world that would see her as neither white, nor Apache, nor Mexican. But some shameful mixture of all three. Love couldn't stop bullets or change laws or soften hearts poisoned by hate. But as she looked at the sleeping baby, perfect and innocent, Margaret felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. Maybe love wasn't enough, but by God, it was a start. We'll figure it out, she said quietly. Somehow. Joseph studied her face. You say we. Yes. Dangerous word. I know. They sat in companionable silence as night fell. Outside, wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of more snow. Margaret knew the reprieve was temporary. The town's suspicion would grow. The sheriff would return. Choices would have to be made. But for tonight, they were together. Three souls finding shelter in each other against a world that wanted them separate. Broken. Alone. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For now. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both foreign and achingly familiar to Margaret. Morning meant tending animals while Joseph prepared Hope's first feeding. Midday brought shared meals and quiet conversation. Afternoon saw Joseph splitting wood or mending things around the cabin while Margaret sewed tiny garments from Mrs. Chen's cloth scraps. Evenings belonged to Hope, bathing her in the warm water by the stove, singing lullabies, taking turns walking her when she fussed. It was on the 10th day, as February sunshine struggled through gray clouds, that Margaret realized she was happy. The thought struck her while watching Joseph patiently teach Hope to grasp his finger, making soft clicking sounds that made the baby gurgle with delight. When was the last time she'd felt this simple contentment? Before Thomas's ugly courtship, before her parents died, she couldn't remember. You're smiling, Joseph observed, not looking up from Hope. Am I? Margaret touched her face, surprised. I suppose I am. Good look. Should wear more often. Heat crept up her neck. Flatterer. Truth-teller. He settled Hope in her basket, then moved to where Margaret sat mending one of his shirts. Your hand's healing. She looked down at her fingers, seeing them through his eyes. The constant work of frontier life had left them rough, calloused, capable. But lately, the harsh red had faded, the cracks healed. Less wash to do in winter, I suppose. No, happiness healing. See it in Apache women, too. Hard life makes hard body, but joy makes soft again. Their eyes met and held. Margaret became acutely aware of his nearness, the warmth radiating from his body, the way afternoon light caught the silver threads in his still long hair. Something shifted in the air between them, delicate as frost patterns on glass. Margaret, he began, voice low. A horse's whinny shattered the moment. Joseph moved to the window in one fluid motion, instantly alert. Rider coming, alone. Margaret's stomach clenched as she recognized the figure. It's Matthew Price. He owns the ranch north of here. Trouble? I don't know. He's never visited before. She smoothed her hair, tried to calm her racing heart. Take Hope to the root cellar. Stay quiet. Joseph gathered the baby and her things with practiced efficiency, disappearing through the hidden cellar door just as Price's knock echoed through the cabin. Margaret opened the door, forcing pleasant surprise into her expression. Mr. Price, this is unexpected.
Matthew Price was what the town considered a catch-widowed, prosperous, still young enough at 40 to father children. His weathered face arranged itself into what he probably thought was a charming smile. "Miss Thornfield wanted to check how you fared after the storm. As you can see, quite well. Thank you for your concern. Mind if I come in long ride in the cold?" Refusing would seem suspicious. Margaret stepped aside. "Of course. I'll make coffee." Price entered, his eyes scanning the cabin's interior with uncomfortable intensity. Margaret busied herself at the stove, acutely aware of every item that might betray her guests. Had she put away all of Hope's things? Was that one of Joseph's hairs on the table? "Cozy place," Price commented, settling uninvited into her rocking chair. "But awful lonely for a woman alone." "I manage." "Do you?" He leaned back, studying her. "Margaret, may I call you Margaret? I'll speak plain. Town's talking. Sheriff's got folks worked up about this Apache business. Some are saying things, uncharitable things about you." Margaret kept her back turned, measuring coffee with steady hands. "People have always talked about me. I've learned not to care." "But this is different. This is dangerous talk. The kind that leads to night riders and burned barns." Her hand stilled. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Price?" "Lord, no." He sounded genuinely shocked. "I'm trying to help. See, if you had protection, a husband's protection, folks would leave you be." Margaret turned slowly. "And you're offering to be that husband?" Price's face reddened. "I'm a good man. Fair, prosperous. My poor Sarah's been gone 2 years now. Ranch needs a woman's touch. You'd want for nothing. Except freedom." "Freedom," he frowned. "What freedom is there in living like this, scraping by, fighting the land alone, no children to carry on your name?" Margaret poured coffee, choosing her words carefully. "Mr. Price, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not looking for a husband." "Maybe you should be." His tone hardened slightly. "Times are changing. Government's cracking down on Indian sympathizers. Woman alone, already under suspicion. Might find herself in need of protection whether she wants it or not." The threat was politely veiled, but unmistakable. Margaret met his eyes steadily. "Is that what you came to say?" Price sipped his coffee, grimacing at its bitter strength. "I came to make an honest offer. My ranch, my name, my protection. Think about it." He stood. "I'm not a patient man by nature, but for you, I'll wait. Few days, maybe a week. After that. After that. After that. I can't guarantee what folks might do. Fear makes people act foolish." He set down his cup. "You're too fine a woman to waste away out here. Margaret, too fine to throw your life away on foolish principles." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, one more thing. Saw fresh axe marks on your wood pile. Clean cuts, lot of strength behind them. You must be working awful hard." Margaret's blood chilled. "I do what needs doing." "Course you do." His smile held no warmth. "Weak, Margaret. Think hard." After he left, Margaret stood frozen until she heard Hope's thin cry from below. She lifted the cellar door. "He's gone." Joseph emerged, the baby fussing in his arms. His face was granite hard with controlled rage. "I heard Joseph. This man, he threatens you." It wasn't a question. Margaret took Hope, soothing her automatically. "He makes an offer, in his mind, probably a generous one. You want this marriage to him?" "No." The word came out sharper than intended. "No. But he's right about one thing. The town's fear is growing. My refusal will feed that fear." Joseph paced the cabin like a caged mountain cat. "I bring this trouble. Should never have come." "Stop!" Margaret's voice cut through his self-recrimination. "You came because a dying woman begged you to save her child. You came because you had nowhere else to go. That's not bringing trouble. That's being human." "Human?" He laughed bitterly. "Humans killing each other over color of skin.
over lines on maps, over who owns what never belonged to anyone. He stopped pacing, faced her. You should take his offer. Margaret's jaw dropped. What? Safe choice, smart choice, protect you from town's anger. And what about you? What about hope? We disappear. You say we left in night. You know nothing. His voice was steady, resolved. Better for everyone. Better, Margaret's voice rose. Better for who? For hope, carried through winter by an injured man. For you, hunted like an animal for me, married to a man I don't love, living a lie for the rest of my days. Better than dead, Joseph's control cracked. You don't know what they do to Apache sympathizers. Don't know what they do to women who... He broke off, jaw clenched. Who what? Who choose their own path? Who refuse to bow to fear? Margaret settled hope in her basket, then crossed to stand before him. I've been dead, Joseph. 3 years of walking death, going through motions, feeling nothing. Then you arrived, and I remembered what living felt like. Margaret. No, listen. She reached up, touched his face, felt him go still beneath her fingers. I won't go back to that emptiness. Not for Matthew Price, not for the sheriff, not for all the safety in the world. Joseph caught her hand, held it against his cheek. Brave words. But bravery won't stop bullets. Neither will cowardice. They stood frozen, her hand trapped in his, the space between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Joseph's thumb traced the calluses on her palm, gentle as butterfly wings. You strange woman, he murmured, make me forget careful. Good. He bent his head slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with growing warmth. Margaret had been kissed before, Thomas's drunken pawing, a few fumbling boys in her youth. This was different. This was recognition, coming home, finding shelter in another's soul. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, Joseph rested his forehead against hers. This make everything harder. I know. Should stop now, while still can. Can we still? His laugh was rueful. No, too late when knocked on door. Maybe too late when first saw your smoke. He pulled back, studying her face. You understand what this means. Not just danger from town. My life. Always running. Always edge of two worlds. No real home. We'll make a home. Wherever we are, we'll make it. We again. Yes, we... Margaret smiled through the tears she hadn't realized were falling. You, me, and hope. Whatever comes. Joseph wiped her tears with infinite gentleness. Heart speaks louder than blood. Singing River said this. Now understand. Hope chose that moment to voice her hunger, breaking the spell. They moved apart, returning to the routine of feeding and tending, but something fundamental had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by casual touches, shared glances, the easy intimacy of people who'd crossed an invisible line. As Margaret prepared dinner, she found herself humming. The future remained uncertain, dangerous, possibly brief. Matthew Price would return with his ultimatum. The town's suspicion would boil over. Choices would have to be made. But for now, in this moment, she was where she belonged. Not alone in her fortress of solitude, but part of something larger, warmer, worth fighting for. She'd been sleeping, as Joseph said, waiting for spring. Spring had arrived in the unlikely form of a wounded warrior and an orphaned baby, bringing with it all the mess and glory and terror of new life. Margaret had opened her door to shelter them from the storm. Instead, they'd sheltered her from something far worse than winter's cold, the slow freeze of a heart too long alone. And for that gift, she would fight whoever came to her door, face whatever judgment the world offered. Love might not be enough to protect them, but it was enough to try. As if reading her thoughts, Joseph moved behind her, arms encircling her waist. chin resting on her shoulder as she stirred the pot. Smells good. Rabbit stew? Nothing fancy. Best smell in world. Food. Warm home. Family cooking together. Family. The word sent warmth spreading through her chest. Is that what we are? What else, man, woman, baby, sharing home and hearts, Apache or white? Same meaning. Margaret leaned back against his solid warmth. Outside, wind picked up, rattling windows with icy fingers. Soon, the world would intrude with all its ugly necessities. But inside, for these precious moments, they were simply family. It was more than she'd dared dream. It was everything. The night came alive with torchlight and angry voices just past midnight, 5 days after Matthew Price's visit. Margaret woke to Joseph's hand on her shoulder, his body already coiled for action. "How many?" she whispered, reaching for her wrapper. 8, maybe 10. His voice was deadly calm. "Horses out front, 2 more watching back." Margaret's heart hammered as she moved to the window. Torches bobbed like fireflies from hell, illuminating faces twisted with righteous fury. She recognized several Tom Barrett from the feed store, the Hutchinson brothers who ran cattle south of town, Deputy Collins, and there, sitting his horse with grim satisfaction, Sheriff Bowman. "Margaret Thornfield," Bowman's voice boomed across the snow. "Come out peaceful-like. We need words with you." Joseph already had his knife in hand, was checking her father's rifle. "Root cellar, take Hope and—" "No." Margaret caught his arm. "Running confirms their suspicions. We face this together." "They'll kill—" "Not if we're smart." She squeezed his hand. "Trust me, please." Hope stirred in her basket, making soft sleeping sounds. Joseph looked from the baby to Margaret, jaw working. Finally, he nodded. "What you need. Stay back from windows. Keep Hope quiet. And Joseph, no violence unless I give the word. And if they force door, then we defend ourselves, but not before." Margaret pulled her heavy shawl over her nightgown, took a deep breath, and opened the door a crack. Cold air and hatred rushed in together. "Sheriff, bit late for social calls." "This ain't social." Bowman's face was red with cold and liquor. "Time for truth. Woman, you got that murdering Apache in there." "I've told you before. I live alone." "Lies." Tom Barrett pushed forward, torch held high. "My boy seen smoke from your chimney all hours. Heard voices. You got someone in there." "Since when is it a crime to talk to myself or keep my fire going in winter?" "Don't play smart," Bowman warned. "We know he's here. Found tracks leading this direction. Big man, barefoot in snow. Sound familiar?" Margaret forced her voice steady. "Tracks could be anyone's. Trappers, drifters, even your own men searching. You find tracks leading to my door specifically." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He hadn't. She realized. They were fishing. "Enough games." One of the Hutchinson brothers shouldered forward. "Let us search. You got nothing to hide. You got nothing to fear. I've got plenty to fear from drunken men forcing their way into a woman's home at night." Margaret lifted her chin. "You want to search, Sheriff? You come back with a warrant, and in daylight, with the minister present. Don't need no warrant to hunt a killer." Deputy Collins spat. "You do to enter my home." Margaret's voice rang clear in the cold night. "I know my rights. My father taught me well." "Your father'd roll in his grave, knowing what you become." Barrett snarled. "Indian lover, betrayer of your own kind." "My father taught me to judge people by their actions, not their blood." Margaret felt her temper rise. "And right now, the only threatening actions I see are from you men." "Threatening?" Bowman laughed ugly. "Woman, you ain't seen threatening, but you will. You don't produce that Apache. We can make life real uncomfortable for someone who won't cooperate with the law." "The law requires evidence. Sheriff, not torchlight mobs." Evidence. The sheriff leaned forward in his saddle. How about that fresh venison hanging in your smokehouse? You take down a dear, recently big, strong woman like you. Margaret's mind raced. Joseph had hunted 3 days ago, bringing back meat they desperately needed. I trade for what I need. With who no one in town's traded with you. Passing travelers, trappers. Not everyone reports their business to you. Sheriff. Convenient. Bowman's smile was predatory. Real convenient. Like them baby clothes, missus. Chen says you bought fabric for her. Margaret's blood chilled. Had missus. Chen betrayed her. No, more likely someone had seen Margaret leaving the shop. Pressured the seamstress after. I sew for trade sometimes. Plan ahead for spring babies. In the middle of winter. When else do I have time for needlework? The crowd was growing restless. Ugly energy building. Someone, she couldn't see who, threw a rock that shattered against her doorframe. Enough talk. Tom Barrett surged forward. Drag her out, search every corner. Stay back. Margaret retreated, hand on the door. First man through this door gets a bullet. You threatening law-abiding citizens? Bowman asked silkily. I'm promising to defend my home against trespassers. Big words for a woman alone. I'm not alone, Margaret said firmly. God watches over me, and he sees you men, drunk on fear and hate, terrorizing a woman in the night. How proud your wives must be. How brave you must feel. Her words found their mark. A few men shifted uncomfortably. Clarence Hutchinson looked down, torch wavering. Don't let her shame you, Barrett roared. She's harboring a killer, a savage who'd murder your children in their beds. The only savagery I see is yours. Margaret shot back. When did we become the kind of people who attack without proof, who let fear turn us into the very monsters we claim to fight? Pretty words won't save you. Bowman said, Here's what's going to happen. You got till dawn to produce that Apache. If he ain't standing in the street come sunup, we'll tear this place apart board by board. Without a warrant. Don't need a warrant for a public safety emergency. And that's what I'm declaring this. His voice dropped, menacing. You can make this easy. Margaret, give him up. Save yourself. Hell, Price says he'll still marry you if you cooperate. Clean slate, respectable life. All you got to do is be sensible. Sensible? Margaret tasted the word like poison. You mean cowardly? I mean smart, dawn woman. You got till dawn. The sheriff wheeled his horse, the mob following reluctantly. Margaret watched until the last torch disappeared into darkness, then sagged against the doorframe. Joseph was there instantly, catching her before she fell. You magnificent, he breathed, like warrior queen, sending enemies running with words alone. They'll be back. She leaned into his strength. And words won't stop them next time. Then we run. Now, take hope and... Joseph. She pulled back to look at him. I need to tell you something. About why I can't run, why I won't. He guided her to sit by the fire, checked on Hope still miraculously sleeping, then knelt before her. Tell. Margaret stared into the flames, gathering courage. My parents raised me to believe in justice, in standing for what's right, even when it's hard. My father, he was a conductor. Joseph frowned. Conductor. Underground Railroad. Before the war, he helped runaway slaves reach freedom. The memories rushed back. I was young, but I remember. People hidden in our root cellar, my mother keeping watch, the fear, but also the pride, knowing we were part of something righteous. Understanding dawned in Joseph's eyes. Dangerous. Very. We had close calls, threats, a cross burned in our yard once. Margaret's hands clenched. But my father never wavered. He said evil grows when good people step aside, said the measure of a person isn't their comfort, but their courage. Wise man. He was, and he'd haunt me forever if I ran now. She met Joseph's eyes. Don't you see this is the same fight? Different people, same hatred, same fear of what's different, same need for someone to stand up and say no.
Joseph took her hands. Your father not here. Can't expect you fight alone.
I'm not alone. She squeezed his fingers. And neither are you. Not anymore.
Margaret, his voice broke. They'll destroy you for us. Can't let that happen.
You can't stop me.
She managed a watery smile.
Stubborn. Remember, besides, I have a plan.
Plan?
Dawn's 5 hours away. Enough time to prepare.
She stood, energy renewed by purpose.
First, we hide everything that could link to you and Hope. Make the cabin look like I truly live alone. Then we pray my father's old friends remember their debts.
They worked swiftly, efficiently.
Joseph's few belongings went into the root cellar along with Hope's things, the basket, bottles, spare diapers.
Margaret scrubbed away any trace of their presence while Joseph created false trails in the snow, leading away from the cabin in multiple directions.
Make them think you fled, he explained, returning with snow in his hair. Confusion helps.
Hope woke hungry. As Margaret fed her, she memorized the baby's face, the way her nose scrunched while eating, the perfect fan of her lashes, the dimple that appeared when she was content. If this was goodbye—
Stop,
Joseph said quietly. No goodbye thoughts. We survived this. How do you know what I'm thinking? Your face, open like sky. Everything shows. Margaret laughed despite everything.
My mother used to say the same. Said I'd make a terrible poker player.
Good thing. Lies are ugly on you. They prepared for siege as best they could. Water barrels filled. Weapons loaded and placed strategically. Food within easy reach if they were trapped inside. Joseph showed her Apache defense techniques. Ways to barricade that looked accidental but would slow attackers.
If fighting comes, he said, positioning furniture.
You take Hope to cellar. I hold them off. We hold them off. Together or not at all. He started to argue. Saw her expression. Subsided. Together then, but Hope goes below first sign of trouble.
Agreed.
As the hours crawled past, they took turns standing watch. Margaret dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. Joseph never seemed to sleep, just shifted between watchful stillness and coiled readiness. An hour before dawn, Margaret made her move. I need to go to the barn. One last thing to prepare. Joseph frowned. Not safe.
It's necessary. Trust me.
He searched her face, then nodded.
I watch from here. Any danger, you run back.
Margaret slipped out into the pre-dawn darkness. The barn loomed black against black, but she knew every board, every shadow. Inside, Bessie lowed softly, sensing disturbance. Margaret moved past her to the far wall, feeling for the hidden catch her father had installed 20 years ago. The concealed compartment opened with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay her father's signal lantern and the colored glass that had once meant freedom for so many. Red for danger, green for safe passage, blue for urgent help needed. Margaret's hands trembled as she climbed to the hayloft, hanging the lantern where it could be seen for miles. Blue glass in place. She lit the wick with a prayer that someone, somewhere, remembered the old signals. She barely made it back inside before the eastern sky began to pale. Joseph pulled her close, warming her frozen hands. What you do?
Called for help, whether it comes.
She shrugged.
At least I tried.
Dawn arrived with terrible beauty, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of rose and gold. Margaret stood at the window, Joseph beside her, Hope sleeping peacefully in her basket. Whatever came next, they would face it as family. The first horses appeared as the sun cleared the mountains, dark shapes against pristine snow. But something was different. Too many riders. And from the wrong direction.
Joseph,
Margaret's voice was strange.
Those aren't townsfolk. He tensed, hand moving to his knife, then froze. Buffalo soldiers. Margaret's heart leaped. A full cavalry unit, dark faces proud beneath regulation hats, rode into her valley. And at their head, gray-haired but ramrod straight, rode Sergeant Elijah Freeman, her father's oldest friend from the railroad days. Well, I'll be damned, she breathed. You know them. The sergeant, he owes my father his life, and his family's. Tears blurred her vision. The lantern, he saw it, he came. The cavalry unit positioned itself between the cabin and the approaching mob. Sheriff Bowman and his men pulled up short, confusion clear on their faces. Morning, Sheriff. Sergeant Freeman's voice carried like thunder. Heard you might be planning some mischief. Thought we'd stop by. Make sure everything stays legal and proper-like. This ain't army business, Bowman sputtered. Public safety is everybody's business. And the colonel, he takes a dim view of mob justice. Real dim view. Freeman smiled. All teeth. Now, you got a warrant to search this property. Don't need. You do. Law's real clear on that. So unless you got paper, I suggest you men head home. Let cooler heads prevail. The standoff stretched taut. 30 armed soldiers against a handful of would-be vigilantes. The outcome was never in doubt. This ain't over, Bowman snarled. That woman's harboring... That woman, Freeman interrupted, is the daughter of Samuel Thornfield, man who saved my family and dozens more. His blood deserves respect, not torchlight mobs. He leaned forward in his saddle. You got proof of crimes. You pursue them proper. Otherwise, you leave Miss Thornfield in peace. That clear. The sheriff's group retreated, but their faces promised future trouble. Freeman waited until they were gone, then dismounted and approached the cabin. Margaret met him at the door, tears streaming. Sergeant Freeman, I can't believe you came. Miss Margaret. He removed his hat. Saw the blue light. Knew it meant Samuel's girl needed help bad. We were camped just 2 valleys over, heading to Fort Bridger. His eyes were kind, but knowing. You want to tell me what's really going on? Margaret glanced back at Joseph, who stood ready to fight or flee. It's complicated. Always is. Freeman studied Joseph with a soldier's assessment. Apache. Joseph nodded, chin high. And the baby I hear crying. Orphaned? Margaret said quickly. Her mother died fleeing soldiers. I'm trying to keep her safe. Freeman was quiet for a long moment. Then, your father hid my wife and babies for 2 weeks. Slave catchers came right to his door. He never blinked. He met Margaret's eyes. I pay my debts. What are you saying? I'm saying Fort Bridger's got civilian jobs need filling. Blacksmith, laundry, cooking. Got a school too, for young ones. Mixed families ain't common, but they ain't unknown neither. He glanced at Joseph. Man willing to work, keep the peace, could make a life there. Margaret's knees nearly buckled. Sergeant! Course, you'd have to be proper married. Army's particular about that. A smile tugged his lips. Just happens the chaplain rides with us. Could take care of that real quick. Married, Joseph spoke for the first time. She deserves better than a man who walked through blizzards to save a baby, Margaret interrupted. Who stands ready to die protecting us, who makes me remember what living feels like. She faced him fully. Joseph, will you marry me? His eyes widened. Margaret, I know it's not romantic. I know it's rushed. But I also know my heart. She took his hands. You said heart speaks louder than blood. My heart's been shouting since you walked through my door. Joseph pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. You sure, my life, my blood, always make things hard for you. Without you, I have no life, just existence. She cupped his face. I'm sure. Then yes, 1,000 times yes. Freeman cleared his throat. Best make it quick. Sheriff will be back with reinforcements.
You need to be gone before then. The next hour passed in a blur. The chaplain, a young man clearly bewildered but willing, performed a simple ceremony in Margaret's cabin. Freeman and his corporal stood witness. Hope cradled in Margaret's arms, cooed through the vows as if giving her blessing. "Don't got a ring," Joseph said, frustrated. Margaret pulled off her mother's thin gold band, worn on her right hand since the funeral. "Use this. She'd approve." As Joseph slipped the ring onto her finger, Margaret felt her parents' presence so strongly she nearly gasped. This was what they'd taught her, to choose love over fear, courage over comfort, right over easy. "I pronounce you husband and wife," the chaplain concluded. "May God bless your union and keep you safe in his hands." Joseph kissed her, soft and reverent. Hope gurgled approval, and for one perfect moment, the world outside ceased to matter. But reality couldn't be held at bay. Within the hour, they were packed and ready. Margaret took only essentials and treasures: her parents' Bible, her grandmother's quilt, the few photographs she possessed. Everything else would stay. "The animals," she worried. "Mrs. Chen," Freeman said, "sent word she'll care for them till you can send for them or sell. Woman seems to think highly of you." Standing in the doorway of the only home she'd known, Margaret felt her chest tight with grief and anticipation. So much history in these walls. So much pain and loneliness, too. Joseph's hand found hers. "Ready?" She looked at him, her husband now, impossible as that seemed. Looked at Hope, their daughter in all ways that mattered. Looked at the future stretching uncertain but no longer empty. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." As the wagon rolled away, escorted by blue-coated soldiers, Margaret didn't look back. Ahead lay Fort Bridger, challenges she couldn't imagine, a life built on frontier courage and unexpected love. Behind lay her old self, the woman who'd chosen walls over risk, isolation over connection. That woman had opened a door on a storm-wild night. What walked through had transformed her, challenged her, completed her in ways she'd never dared dream. The sun climbed higher, warming her face despite the winter cold. Joseph sat beside her on the wagon seat, Hope secure between them. His free hand covered hers where it rested on her knee. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Margaret thought of the cabin growing small in the distance, the town that would rage at her escape, the proper life she'd rejected forever. "None," she said, and meant it. "Only gratitude." "For what?" "For the storm that brought you, for the courage to open that door, for this." She gestured at their small family, their uncertain future, the vast sky stretching endlessly above. "For all of this." Joseph lifted her hand, kissed her work-worn fingers. "Heart speaks louder than blood," he murmured. "You teach me this is true." The wagon rolled on, carrying them toward whatever waited. Margaret leaned against her husband's shoulder, their daughter safe between them, and felt the last of her old walls crumble to dust. She was no longer alone. She was no longer afraid. She was home. The acrid smell of smoke reached them before they saw the flames. Joseph pulled the wagon to a halt, his body tensing like a drawn bow. Behind them, Sergeant Freeman raised his hand, stopping the cavalry unit. "That's coming from my place," Margaret whispered, dread pooling in her stomach. Against the afternoon sky, a column of black smoke rose from the direction they'd come. Her barn. It had to be the barn. "They waste no time," Freeman said grimly. "Sheriff must have gone back soon as we left." Margaret's hands clenched in her lap. Bessie, the chickens, all her father's tools, the hidden compartment that had saved so many lives. Gone. "Just property," Joseph said quietly, covering her hands with his. "We have what matters." Hope fussed in her basket, picking up on the tension. Margaret gathered the baby close, drawing comfort from her warm weight. Joseph was right. They'd escaped with their lives,
their freedom, but the loss still cut deep.
We should keep moving, Freeman advised. They might follow. As the wagon rolled on, Margaret turned for one last look. The smoke had spread. Not just the barn now. Her cabin too, most likely. 28 years of life reduced to ash and spite.
I'm sorry, Joseph murmured.
You're home, because of me.
Our home, Margaret corrected firmly. And I'd rather see it burn than live there without you and Hope.
By evening, they'd covered 15 miles, the landscape changing from familiar valleys to unknown territory. Freeman called a halt near a stream lined with cottonwoods, their bare branches stark against the darkening sky. We'll camp here tonight, the sergeant announced. Post guards. Don't think they'll follow this far, but best stay cautious. The soldiers set up camp with practiced efficiency. Margaret found herself the center of curious but respectful attention, a white woman married to an Apache, traveling with a mixed-blood baby. She could only imagine the stories they'd tell around future campfires. Joseph tended the horses while Margaret fed Hope, using the last of the goat's milk powder. Tomorrow they'd need to find another solution. Cow's milk. Maybe, though it wouldn't be ideal for one so young. Ma'am? A young corporal approached, hat in hand. Sergeant Freeman says to tell you there's a woman at Fort Bridger could wet nurse. Lost her own babe last month. Might be willing, if approached right.
Thank you.
Margaret's throat tightened at this unexpected kindness.
That's wonderful news.
The soldier shifted awkwardly. My own ma was helped by strangers once. Said we should pass it on when we can. He glanced at Joseph, returning from the horses. Your man there, he fought in the wars.
I don't know,
Margaret admitted.
There's much we haven't had time to discuss.
Got the look. Way he moves. Checks the perimeter. Seen it in men who've faced death regular. The corporal nodded respectfully. You'll be all right at Bridger. Colonel's fair. And there's other mixed families. Not easy, but possible. As night fell, they gathered around the campfire. The soldiers shared their rations, hardtack and beans, but seasoned with unexpected generosity. Joseph sat slightly apart, watchful, until Freeman himself gestured him closer. You serve? The sergeant asked directly. Joseph hesitated.
Scouted? For Gray Fox, General Crook.
Murmurs ran through the assembled soldiers. Crook was known for using Apache scouts, treating them with respect unusual among Army officers. Geronimo campaign. Before left when Joseph's jaw tightened. When saw what coming, both sides wanting blood. No honor in that war. Freeman nodded slowly. Man's gotta follow his conscience, especially when the fighting turns wrong. The talk turned to other things. Fort Bridger's layout. The civilian jobs available. Which officers to approach and which to avoid. Margaret listened with half an ear, exhausted by the day's emotions. Hope slept peacefully, unaware her world had changed forever. You should rest, Joseph said softly. Long day tomorrow. They'd been given a small tent, privacy respected even in these rough conditions. Margaret settled Hope between them, creating a barrier of propriety that seemed absurd given they were married, but married in haste, in crisis. They'd barely touched since that desperate kiss during the ceremony.
Joseph, she whispered in the darkness. Are you sorry we didn't choose this way?
Choose, his voice was thoughtful. Every day choose. I choose knock your door. You choose open. Choose shelter us. Choose stand against town. Choose marry. His hand found hers across Hope's sleeping form. Maybe not planned this way, but still choose.
I just wish...
I wanted to court properly. Give you time to decide if...
Shh. His thumb stroked her knuckles. You think I not watching you these weeks. See how you gentle with Hope. Fierce protecting us. See you sing when happy. Bite lip when worried.
Learn you take coffee black but sneak sugar in beans. Know you talk to chickens. Name the goat. Cry over burned barn but not let me see.
He shifted closer, voice dropping. Margaret, I know you. Know your heart. That better than any courting. Tears slipped down her temples. When did you know? When did you decide? First night. You could shoot, send away. Instead, you save hope, save me. But more way you hold her, like she precious, like she worth everything. That's when know you the one. The one. Singing rivers say everyone has one person their spirit recognizes, even across different worlds, the one who makes them whole. His voice roughened. You, my one, Margaret, maybe always was, maybe why I walk through storm to your door. Margaret couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she lifted his hand to her lips, kissed each scarred knuckle. In the darkness, she felt him shudder. Sleep now, he managed. Tomorrow we start new life. But sleep eluded Margaret. Her mind raced with all they'd left behind, all that waited ahead. Fort Bridger meant safety, but also scrutiny. How would they be received? What prejudices would Hope face? Could Joseph find dignity in civilian work after the freedom of scouting? Beside her, Joseph's breathing hadn't deepened into sleep either. They lay awake, hands clasped, hearts too full for rest. Dawn came too soon. The camp stirred early. Soldiers breaking down tents and dousing fires with military precision. Margaret tended Hope while Joseph helped with the horses, already earning approving nods from the cavalrymen. He's got good hands, Freeman observed, joining Margaret. That'll serve him well at Bridger. Always need skilled horse handlers. He's more than that, Margaret said quietly. He reads the land like scripture, knows every plant, every track, speaks 3 languages besides English. Don't doubt it, but at Bridger, he'll need to be careful. Keep those skills quiet till folks get used to him. Apache scouts one thing when the army's using them, another when they're living alongside civilians. Margaret understood the warning. Even in relative safety, they'd need to navigate carefully, prove themselves slowly. The fire that destroyed her home was a reminder. Hatred followed wherever they went. They made good time that morning, the trail following a river valley between snow-capped peaks. Hope traveled well, the wagon's motion lulling her to sleep. Joseph had fashioned a better cushioned box for her, using blankets and ingenuity to create a safe nest. Around midday, they met another group traveling east, a Mormon family heading to Salt Lake City. The patriarch eyed them suspiciously, but nodded polite greeting to Freeman. His wife, however, stared openly at Margaret holding Hope, at Joseph on the wagon seat. "Is that your baby?" the woman blurted. "Yes," Margaret replied simply. "But she's—" the woman caught herself, flushing. "Beautiful," Margaret finished. "Yes, she is." The woman looked like she wanted to say more, but her husband urged their wagon on. As they passed, Margaret heard one of the children ask, "Ma, why's that white lady with an Indian?" The mother's response was lost in distance, but Margaret could imagine she'd be answering such questions the rest of her life. So would Hope. "You do that well," Joseph commented. "Not rise to bait." "Practice." Margaret shifted Hope to her other arm. "Though I suspect I'll need much more." They stopped for noon rest near a cluster of pines, while the soldiers tended horses. Margaret walked Hope along the stream, singing softly. The baby was alert today, dark eyes tracking movement, tiny fists waving. So much of both parents in her features, her mother's delicate bone structure, her father's proud nose. "Growing fast," Joseph said, joining them. "Getting stronger." "She'll need to be strong." Margaret watched Hope grasp Joseph's offered finger. "The world won't be kind to her." "No, but she have us, have our love. That make her stronger than world's hate." They stood together, watching clear water tumble over stones. Peaceful moment in the midst of upheaval. Then Joseph stiffened, head turning sharply east. "What is it?" Margaret asked, alarmed. "Riders,
Moving fast." He was already shepherding her back to camp. Maybe nothing, maybe... A gunshot cracked across the valley, then another. The camp erupted in controlled chaos, soldiers diving for cover, weapons appearing in hands. "Take cover," Freeman bellowed. "Behind the wagons." Joseph thrust Margaret and Hope behind a wagon wheel. Positioning himself in front of them, more shots rang out, kicking up dirt near the horses. "Can you see them?" Freeman called out. 6 men, a soldier reported, maybe 7, coming from the east. Margaret's blood chilled. The direction they'd come from. Bowman must have gathered men, followed after all. "Hold fire," Freeman commanded. "Let them get closer. Make shots count." The attackers swept into view, not uniformed soldiers, but civilians on horseback, firing wildly. Margaret recognized Tom Barrett's stocky form. The Hutchinson brothers. They'd come for vengeance, law or no law. The cavalry's discipline told. At Freeman's signal, they fired a coordinated volley. Horses screamed. Men tumbled from saddles. The charge broke apart. Attackers wheeling away to regroup. "Margaret Thornfield," Barrett's voice carried across the battlefield. "You brought this on yourself. Hand over that murdering Apache." "The only murderers I see are you," Margaret shouted back, fury overriding fear. "Attacking soldiers, that's treason." "Defending our land from Indian lovers and race traitors." Another exchange of gunfire. This time, one of the cavalrymen cried out, clutching his shoulder. The attackers had taken better positions, using rocks for cover. "This could go on all day," Freeman muttered. "Lost element of surprise." Joseph touched Margaret's shoulder. "Stay down. Guard Hope." "Where are you?" But he was already gone, melting into the landscape like smoke. Minutes crawled by. More shots exchanged. Both sides dug in now. Then, from behind the attacker's position, came a sound that raised the hair on Margaret's neck. An Apache war cry, fierce and primal. The attackers spun, confused, firing at shadows. Joseph appeared behind one man, knife flashing. The man went down. Before others could react, Joseph vanished again, only to materialize beside another target. "It's a trap!" someone screamed. "Indians everywhere!" Panic shattered their cohesion. Caught between disciplined cavalry fire and Joseph's guerrilla tactics, the attackers broke and ran. 2 lay still. Others nursed wounds as they fled east, beaten and humiliated. "Hold fire," Freeman commanded. "Let them go. They won't be back." Joseph materialized beside the wagon as suddenly as he'd vanished, breathing hard but unharmed. Blood, not his, stained his knife hand. "You magnificent fool." Margaret breathed, caught between relief and anger. "You could have been killed." "They threaten you, threaten Hope." His eyes were chips of obsidian. "That ends." Freeman approached, expression unreadable. "That was some display. Son." Joseph straightened, ready for condemnation. Instead, Freeman extended his hand. "Thank you. You saved my men from a prolonged fight, maybe saved lives." He glanced at the fleeing attackers. "They'll spread word. Apache warrior protecting a white woman and child. That'll give others pause. Or make them madder," Margaret said quietly. "Maybe, but mad and scared is better than just mad." Freeman turned to his men. "Mount up. We're moving out. Johnson, you ride in the wagon till we can tend that shoulder proper." As they prepared to leave, Margaret noticed Joseph staring at the fallen attackers. His face held no satisfaction, only weary sadness. "You all right?" she asked softly. "Didn't want kill again. Promised myself after army days." He looked at his hands. "But they come for you. For Hope. No choice." Margaret took his bloodied hand in hers, uncaring who saw. "You protected your family. There's no shame in that." "Family." He tested the word. "Yes, my family." His fingers tightened on hers.
Fight whole world for family. The wagon rolled on, leaving violence behind. But its echoes would follow. By nightfall, word would spread. The Apache and the white woman who defied convention, defended by Negro cavalry, leaving bodies in their wake. They'd be infamous now. Their story twisted into a dozen versions, each uglier than the last. But as Margaret settled hope for the journey's continuation, Joseph solid beside her on the wagon seat, she found she didn't care what stories spread. Let them talk. Let them rage. She had her family. She had soldiers willing to defend them. She had a future, uncertain but real. The afternoon sun warmed her face as they climbed toward Fort Bridger. Behind them, smoke still rose from her burning past. Ahead waited challenges she couldn't imagine. But hope slept peacefully between her parents. Joseph's hand rested protective on his knife, and Margaret knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever came, they would face it together. The fire had destroyed her house, but from its ashes, something stronger had risen, a family forged in crisis, tempered by violence, bound by love that transcended blood or convention. Let the world burn with hate, they would build something better from the ashes. Fort Bridger rose from the valley like a promise of civilization, its wooden palisades and neat buildings a stark contrast to the wild country they'd traversed. Margaret felt Joseph tense beside her as they approached the gates, his hand instinctively moving to where his knife would be. She touched his arm gently. "We're safe here," she murmured. "Walls mean different things to Apache," he replied quietly. "Sometimes protection, sometimes cage." The guards waved them through after a word from Freeman. Inside, the fort bustled with activity. Soldiers drilling, civilians going about their business, children playing in the dusty streets. More than a few heads turned as their wagon passed, eyes lingering on the unusual family. Freeman led them to a modest but clean cabin on the civilian side of the fort. "This'll be yours," he said. "Previous occupant left for California goldfields. It's furnished after a fashion." Margaret climbed down, hope in her arms, and surveyed their new home. 2 rooms, real glass windows, a proper stove. After weeks in her one-room cabin, it felt almost luxurious. Joseph moved through the space like a cat, checking sightlines, exits, defensive positions. "Thank you, Sergeant," Margaret said, emotion thick in her voice. "For everything." Freeman tipped his hat. "Thank your father, ma'am. His kindness came back to you when needed most." He turned to Joseph. "Report to the quartermaster tomorrow morning. He'll have work, probably start you in the stables, but a man with your skills won't stay there long." After Freeman left, they stood in their new home, the reality of their situation settling over them, married strangers in a strange place, with a baby not their own, starting a life built on necessity and hope. "Well," Margaret said, trying for lightness, "shall we make this a home?" The first days were a whirlwind of adjustment. True to the corporal's word, they found a wet nurse, Mary Sullivan, a sergeant's wife still mourning her stillborn daughter. She took one look at Hope and burst into tears. "She's beautiful," Mary whispered, gathering the baby close. "Just beautiful." While Joseph reported to work each morning, Margaret established their household. The fort's general store was well stocked but expensive. Their meager savings wouldn't last long. She'd need to find work too. "You sew?" asked Mrs. Colonel Patterson, the commanding officer's wife, when Margaret inquired about employment. "We always need seamstresses, especially with your background." Margaret stiffened. "My background?" "Frontier living. Dear, you understand durability over decoration. Half these officers' wives want ball gowns in a fort. Practical clothing is worth its weight in gold." So Margaret bent over needle and thread each day, Hope playing at her feet, earning precious dollars with each completed garment. Joseph worked with horses by day, his natural skill quickly recognized. By evening, he'd return smelling of hay and leather, tired but satisfied. They developed routines, learned each other's rhythms. Joseph rose before dawn, moving silent as shadow while he prepared for work. Margaret would find coffee waiting when she woke. Still hot, perfectly strong. She'd have supper ready when he returned. Simple but filling. They'd eat together. Hope passed between them, sharing the day's small victories and frustrations. But the nights remained awkward. They slept in the same bed. Propriety and space demanded it, but carefully apart. The marriage born of crisis hadn't yet grown into intimacy. They were partners, parents, but not yet truly husband and wife. 2 weeks into their new life, trouble came calling. Margaret answered a knock to find Sheriff Bowman on her doorstep, travel-worn and furious.
"Thought you'd escape justice,"
he snarled. "Sheriff." She kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You're out of your jurisdiction." "Don't matter. I've got federal marshals interested in your Apache. Killing white men makes it federal crime. Self-defense isn't murder. Your men attacked soldiers." Bowman's smile was ugly. "Way I tell it, that Apache ambushed good citizens trying to make lawful arrest." "The Army tells it different," said a firm voice behind Bowman. Colonel Patterson strode up. Flanked by 2 officers, Sergeant Freeman filed a full report. "Your men attacked my soldiers. Any deaths were justified defense." "You taking their side?" Bowman sputtered. "Apache and a race traitor." "I'm taking the law's side, Sheriff, and the law says you have no authority here." Patterson's tone brooked no argument. "I suggest you leave. Now, before I have you arrested for trespassing on federal property." Bowman left, but his parting look promised this wasn't over. Margaret sagged against the doorframe. "He'll be back," she said, "with federal marshals, like he threatened." "Let him try." Patterson replied, "My report's already filed with Washington. Clear case of self-defense. But ma'am," his expression softened slightly, "you and your husband should stay alert. Men like that don't give up easy." That night, Margaret told Joseph about Bowman's visit as they prepared for bed. His face darkened with each word. "Should have killed him," Joseph muttered. "End threat permanent." "No," Margaret caught his hands. "No more killing. We're building a life here. That means living by law, even when law is slow and imperfect. Law didn't protect you before, won't now. Maybe not, but we have to try. For Hope, she needs parents who choose civilization over violence." Joseph pulled away, pacing the small bedroom. "Easy for you, say? You white, law bends for you, even as woman. For me, for Hope, law is weapon against us." "I know." Margaret sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted. "I know it's unfair. Know you have every reason to distrust. But what choice do we have? Live running teach Hope to fear every stranger. Teach her truth. World dangerous for people like us. The world is changing. Joseph, slowly, but changing. Maybe by the time Hope's grown. Maybe gets us killed while waiting." They faced each other across the small room. The divide between their worlds stark in the lamplight. Margaret saw the weight he carried. Generations of betrayal. Promises broken. Violence answered with violence. How could she ask him to trust a system that had never protected his people? "I can't lose you," she said quietly. "Not to violence, not to vengeance. Hope needs you. I need you." Something in her voice reached him. Joseph's shoulders dropped, fight draining away. He sat beside her on the bed, careful distance still between them. In Apache way, revenge is justice, eye for eye. But you're right, Hope needs better. He looked at his hands. Just hard, changing whole life of lessons. "We're both changing," Margaret said. "Both learning. That's what marriage is. Isn't it, growing together?" "This marriage," Joseph's voice was carefully neutral. "What is this marriage?" The question hung between them, unspoken for 2 weeks but always present. They lived as partners, slept as strangers, bound by law and circumstance, but not yet by the deeper ties both felt growing. "It's whatever we make it," Margaret said finally. "We have time. No rush." "No rush," Joseph repeated, but his eyes said different. Said he felt the same pull she did, the same awareness that sparked whenever they accidentally touched. 3 days later, the crisis came from unexpected quarters. Hope fell ill, burning with fever that wouldn't break. The fort doctor, a competent but unimaginative man, prescribed laudanum and cold baths. "It's lung fever," he pronounced. "Common in infants. Either she fights it off or—" He shrugged. Margaret wanted to slap him. Instead, she and Mary Sullivan took turns bathing Hope, trying to coax water between her lips. Joseph paced like a caged animal, helpless in the face of an enemy he couldn't fight. On the second night, Hope's breathing grew labored. Margaret rocked her desperately, singing every lullaby she knew. Nothing helped. The baby's skin burned, her tiny chest struggling for each breath. "Let me," Joseph said suddenly. He'd been silent for hours, standing at the window. Now he knelt before Margaret, hands extended. "Please." Margaret transferred Hope to his arms. Joseph cradled her against his chest, then began to chant, low, rhythmic words in Apache. Not a lullaby, but something older, deeper, a calling song. Margaret somehow understood, calling the spirit back to the body. He chanted for hours, swaying slightly, Hope pressed to his heart. Margaret dozed despite herself, exhausted by vigil. She woke to silence and panicked, but no, Hope breathed easier, fever finally breaking. Joseph still held her, tears tracking silent down his face. "She come back," he whispered. "Almost lost her, like her mother, but she choose stay." "You brought her back," Margaret said. "Your song, your strength." "Our strength." He looked at her with naked vulnerability. "Could not do alone. You here, she knows she loved. That's why she stay." Margaret moved closer, drawn by the raw emotion in his voice. "We're her parents now, both of us. Whatever that means, however it happened, we're her family." "Family." Joseph's free hand found hers. "Want that, want real family, but afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing, like lost everything else. My people, my place, Singing River." His voice broke on the name. "If I let myself love full, and lose again—" "Oh, Joseph." Margaret cupped his face, thumb brushing away tears. "Love isn't safe, never is. But the alternative, living defended, heart closed, that's not living at all. I know. I tried for 3 years." "You stronger than me." "No, just lonelier longer. Long enough to know love's worth the risk." He leaned into her touch, eyes closing. "Margaret, my wife, want to be real husband, but don't know how in your world?" "Then teach me yours," she whispered, "and I'll teach you mine. We'll make our own way." Joseph opened his eyes, something shifting in their depths. Carefully, he settled Hope in her cradle. The crisis passed. Then he returned to Margaret, standing before her uncertain but determined. In Apache way, man courts woman with gifts, horses, blankets, proof he can provide. He spread empty hands. "I have nothing. Only these hands, this heart. Not enough, but—" Margaret silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her frustration and longing and love into the contact. When they parted, both breathing hard, she smiled. "You have everything I need. Gentle hands for hope, strong heart for hard times, courage to face the world beside me." She traced his face, memorizing each line. "Joseph, I choose you, not from necessity or fear, but because my heart recognizes yours, because you make me whole." "Make each other whole," he corrected, and kissed her again. Later, as moonlight silvered their entwined forms,
Margaret marveled at the journey that brought them here. From solitary woman to wife and mother. From wounded warrior to husband and father. From desperate strangers to family. Hope slept peacefully in her cradle. Fever gone, breathing easy. Outside, the fort settled into quiet. Guards walking their rounds. Safe for now, though tomorrow would bring new challenges. "What you thinking?" Joseph asked, tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "About doors," Margaret said. "How one knock changed everything." "Good change." She turned in his arms, seeing their future in his eyes. It wouldn't be easy. Bowman would return with federal marshals. The town's hatred would follow. Hope would face prejudice at every turn. They'd fight battles large and small just to exist. But they'd fight together. Apache wisdom and frontier courage. Love stronger than fear. A family forged in storm and tested by fire. "The best change," she said, and meant it. Dawn came softly, painting their new world in shades of gold and possibility. Hope woke hungry and healthy. Her crisis passed. Joseph rose to tend her while Margaret started breakfast, their movements a dance of domestic harmony. When Colonel Patterson knocked later that morning, they faced him together, united. "Federal marshals were here at dawn," he said without preamble. "I sent them away. Seems someone in Washington owes Sergeant Freeman favors. Your case has been reviewed and dismissed. Self-defense, like I said." Margaret sagged with relief. Joseph's arm came around her, steady and sure. "However," Patterson continued, "I'd suggest you maintain a low profile. Feelings run high about mixed marriages, especially with the Indian troubles. But you follow fort rules, contribute to the community, and you'll find protection here." After he left, Margaret and Joseph stood in their doorway, looking out at their new life. Soldiers drilled in the yard. Children played despite the cold. Mary Sullivan waved from across the way, ready for Hope's morning feeding. "Still want to run?" Margaret asked. Joseph looked down at her, then at Hope in his arms. His face held peace she'd never seen before. "No," he said simply. "This home, you home, worth fighting for. Together, always together." As they stepped into the morning sun, Margaret thought about the woman she'd been, alone in her cabin, frozen in grief and isolation. That woman died when she opened her door to a desperate stranger. In her place stood someone braver, fuller, part of something larger than herself. The journey from solitude to family hadn't followed any path she could have imagined. But standing here, with Joseph beside her and Hope in their arms, facing an uncertain but shared future, Margaret knew one truth. Sometimes the best things in life arrive in the middle of a storm, carried by those we least expect, changing us in ways we never dared dream. And sometimes, all it takes is the courage to open the door. Thank you so much for listening to this story from the Wild West. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're driving through the mountains, relaxing at home, or maybe even somewhere out in the wide frontier yourself. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Margaret and Joseph's journey in the comments below. Your stories and reactions make this community special.